Welcome to my TF2 Valve Casual Scout tier list. So, I have 3,000 hours in the game. I'm not, by no means one of the best players in the game. I'm just like probably about average for 3,000 hours, honestly. I've done some MGing, and I kind of know how to play the game to a decent level, but nothing insane. So I'm going to be ranking these based on how good I think they are in general Valve 12v12 servers. So I'm factoring in all the game modes, so some weapons might kill it in some game modes, and others might not. A lot of these are reskins, so we're going to be going through these. Let's start with the scattergun. So the scattergun, I think, is an easy S tier. You have good capacity, good damage to work with, good accuracy at medium range for chip shots, just really good at dueling, never bad. It's just always good to have it. There isn't a situation where it's bad. It's just always good. Good damage output. Scouts fast. Shoot guys with the scattergun. Have a little bit of fun. All right, Force of Nature. I think the Force of Nature is B tier. I think it's just good. In the hands of a master who can pull off two-shotting, especially with the force applied on the second hit, it can be tricky, but it can be done. But for your average player running this, it's not going to be as good as stock because you only have 2 shots to work with before reloading. And also, when you double jump or when you're in the air, when you shoot, it moves you away from the target. So TF2 has damage ramp up, which is a mechanic where the closer you are to an enemy, the more damage you deal to each other, essentially. So when you move yourself away from an enemy, you deal less damage because of spread of the weapon, from range fall off, and from loss of ramp up. So you actually want to be kind of close to enemies when you can, like when it's safe to, when you're fighting. So moving yourself away kind of hurts that. And also the Force of Nature pushes enemies back. Now there is some use case where, like, let's say there's enemy heavy medic combos constantly like jumping around corners and holding choke points. This allows the scout to push the heavy away or to push a combo away. So you can like blast things away from your team, and it kind of gives you like crowd control. So it can be useful in that way, but if that's your goal, you might as well just like switch to pyro or something. But it can be decent. The force jump is cool. It's fun. It's a really fun weapon to use. Getting the extra jump or using the force jump, kind of like dive bombing people out of nowhere, can be really fun. Similarly, I think the Shortstop is just a little bit better than the Force of Nature, but not by much. The Shortstop is really good at killing minis and taking out sentries. It's not as good as stock in deathmatching or like fighting groups because you only have 4 lower damage shots. It does reload all of its shots at once, but it's just not that much damage to work with. And if you miss a single shot, it can hurt because it does have a tighter spread. So unless you're like right on the target, like right on the enemy's hitbox, you will either deal like full damage or 0. It's very like polarizing, where as with like the stock and even with the Force of Nature, if you miss like half of your pellets, at least half of your pellets deal some damage. Maybe you still get like 30, 40 damage from a whiffed shot. Whereas with this, if you miss a shot, you just deal 0. But it does have more accuracy. It's better at medium range. It's really good at taking out sentries because its more accurate pellets can connect with the sentries hitbox from farther away. And also it doesn't have damage fall off against sentries because sentries do not have damage ramp up applied to them or damage fall off applied to them. So at range, it can take down minis really efficiently, and it can also help with taking down level 3s. But obviously, if your goal is taking down sentries, Scout is not the class for that. You should probably switch to like Soldier or Demo. But it can help for if you're stubborn, like I can be, and like most players, and you just want to play Scout, and there's a bunch of minis around, this can be like an anti-mini tool. And it can be okay at dueling, but against like 2v2s and 3v3s and things like that, it can kind of suffer. In 1v1s, it can be better than stock if you're really accurate. If you can actually 2-tap an enemy scout before they can 2-tap you with stock because you fire faster. You do 72 damage a shot at point blank. So like in a scout 1v1, if you're both not overhealed, you can win that faster, but you have to land 2 meat shots. So that's, you know, it could be a toss-up. Soda Popper, I think, is A tier. I would put it in S if it wasn't so easy for sentries, heavies, snipers, like hit scan to spam you down while you're jumping in the air doing your big jumps. Against projectile classes, it really shines, but on small maps, choke point heavy maps, maps where you can't get behind or above the enemy, it doesn't really do much outside of essentially act as like a Force of Nature that doesn't have the force jump, the force pushback, and also the pushing you back in the air. So it's kind of like a burst damage thing that's really good at point blank and can be really good on open maps when there's a bunch of projectile classes. But once sentries start getting added in the equation, it starts to become worse because while you're doing all your jumps, sentries will just have no trouble hitting you. And that's really where it suffers. But aside from that, on maps with a lot of like skybox and overhead space, you can take advantage of this and easily mess people up. For the babyface blaster, I think this is like here, maybe better than shortstop. I would say it's like high B tier. It can be good. You can be good with it. So depending on your skill, it can move up to A and maybe even S tier, depending on how good you are. But that might just be like the individual player's skill making it good rather than the weapon itself. But you start off slower. You have 4 shots instead of 6, which does suck. And you have to deal damage to build up speed. But anytime you take, I think, 10 damage, you lose all of your speed that's built up. If you take like 3 damage, you'll lose a big percentage of it and so on. So even like the slightest bit of chip damage will slow you down. But you start off slower than normal and you can get up to 170% something speed. You become really fast, really hard to kill, really hard to hit. But sentries can still track you pretty well. You can kind of abuse their lock-on time if you're fast enough and you have enough space and distance and props, like things to hide behind. You can kind of like break line of sight of sentries before they can track you. But on choke point heavy maps, it's just not really going to be good because you're going to end up getting funneled into the enemy team. So either you're going to be with your team being really fast, still separated from the enemies by a choke point, or you're going to have to like somehow get through that choke point. And then if you're back in the enemy lot, like if you're like behind enemy lines, the enemies can easily focus you down. And once you lose that speed, it sucks. But if you're on like an open map, a circular map, or like a big map, like Thunder Mountain, it's another good one, like Upward or something like that, you can take advantage of the huge speed. But keep in mind that as soon as you get hit, you lose it all. So you'll have to get used to fighting at like variable speed. So depending on how good you get with this, maybe it's like A tier, but I would say overall it's probably like B. Because you just start off worse and you have to build up the speed. Backscatter, I think is like C tier. So like, I just ranted about how hard it is to get behind choke points in 12v12, which is usually the case on most maps. So getting behind enemies and shooting them in the back is not something you can easily do without disguises and cloak. Because like cloak lets the spy get through unnoticed and then reappear anywhere. Whereas like with a scout, everyone is going to see you unless there's like a huge map with like big obvious chokes or big obvious flank routes that are easy to abuse and use. So like typically it's hard for scout to get behind enemies unless those enemies are overcommitting, if they're like pushing when they shouldn't be, or they're like overcommitting to like bad fights and things like this. So like depending on how good or bad the enemy players are, they usually will stay with their team in like groups, like small groups. So when you encounter them, you're kind of encountering groups, which makes this weapon worse because it has 4 shots loaded instead of 6 and it has worse accuracy. So in terms of like team fighting, which is mostly what the game is in TF2, like your head-to-head fight is just worse. You have worse accuracy for chip shots and you have less capacity. So like if you're fighting a group, like the scattergun can still deal like 50 to 60 at a kind of like medium range. Whereas with this, you have less accuracy. So that means fewer pellets hit. Fewer pellets hit, you're dealing less damage. Getting behind enemies and one-shotting them with this, it only really works on 125s. And even then, like for how much work you need to do to squeeze out value from this, people are paranoid as hell in TF2 because of spies. So people check behind them a lot. So a lot of times you just end up in a 1v1. Like if the enemy players are remotely good, they will usually be looking around and like on routes to like different choke points where the front lines are. So if you break through the enemy front lines and you're behind their front lines and you're looking to pick off stragglers, usually people are paranoid looking around because of the fact that spies exist. So if spies weren't a thing, maybe this would be better, but people's awareness is actually really, really high for the most part, unless they're a new player. So usually what ends up happening is you just enter 1v1s with a less accurate, less capacity scattergun. And best case scenario, you catch a bad player off guard and one shot. Well, that's not really the best case scenario, but like you can do things like if you get behind a heavy med and the heavy doesn't turn around, isn't paying attention, like he's not really particularly good at the game, you can deal extra damage and stuff like that. But my problem with this is like as soon as they turn around, you just lose your bonus damage no matter what. Whereas like with this, it's just consistent, reliable, and predictable. You know what it's gonna do. Like if I have to take a 1v1 with a sniper and he sees me and I'm in their back lines and I'm close, like I'm medium range or closer, I'm fine. He's dead as hell unless he's a god and quickscopes me somehow. But if I have to take it with this at medium range, my chip shots are going to deal, you know, maybe even half damage because of less accuracy, or like a third of the damage, or like 2/3 of the damage maybe. So like I could hit like 250s to 60s and then clean them up with another chip shot or whatever. Maybe chip shot for like 50, and as I'm closing distance, I hit like an 80, and that's enough to kill. Whereas like with this, your chip shot might be not enough. So like this pushes you into damage thresholds that are safer and cleaner, whereas this, like if you're assuming that people are going to be unaware and not turning around, or that's the case, then use it, but it's not really that good. Stock pistol, I'll put it in A tier. I'd put it in S, but you have to be really good to make it S, and I don't even think I'm that good. So like I'm probably around like an A tier pistol user. My tracking's okay. It's not god tier levels. I'm not like mowing people down, but it's, you know, I'm good enough with tracking that most of my shots hit. But there are people that will land every single pistol shot and just like do, I think it's like 120, 140 DPS or something like that if every single shot hits, which is actually really high for a secondary. So you can mow people down from full health. It's actually a lot of damage. But overall, I'd say it's just good at dealing with enemies at range, poking sentries, maybe taking down a sentry, pressuring a sentry, pressuring a high like damage threat like a soldier, a demo, or a heavy that you don't want to get close to until they're like low HP. Let's say they're like a really good soldier, demo, heavy with good awareness, good positioning, so you can't really just rush in and shoot them with your scatter. You have to kind of like, you know, distract them, help your team make some progress, put some damage on them. And then when they start fighting your team, maybe flank them, pull out your scatter gun, stuff like that. Really good utility for just like dealing damage at range, pressuring things, killing retreating enemies, poking snipers to flinch them to maybe if they're off their aim while you're like moving in open areas and stuff like that. Just really good overall. These are reskins. The Capper is definitely better. I don't really care for the Lugermorth. Like these are equal, they're tied, they're identical. Capper is really cool, but I don't think it's S tier because it's just the stock pistol. Really cool skin, very expensive. I think it's like $40 or something. It's like, it might be $100. It's like really expensive, but really cool. Lugermorph, just a reskin. Bonk, situational as hell. Like 9 times out of 10, you use it, you get through enemy front lines, you get slowed down from taking damage, and a good player chases you and kills you. So like, unless sometimes you get through. Sometimes you get through, but if 2 enemies decide they want to kill you, you could be the best scout in the game. That speed debuff is going to hurt your 1v1. You're going to be such an easy target. They can be like new players and still probably get you. Or if there's like a sentry where you end up, if there's like a sentry in the front and like a secondary sentry, which is often the case for whatever reason, people engineer spam and put sentries everywhere. So usually you get through and then there's just like too much crap to deal with. Ideally, you pop bonk, run through, get away unnoticed, which does happen sometimes. Get in the enemy backlines and then just go to town with the stock scattergun, just killing them all, like picking your fights and looking for stragglers and stuff like this. That's like the ideal scenario, right? But depending on the map, some maps are so small and narrow that it just funnels the entire enemy team through like a single alleyway. And once you get in that area, like they just all see you and it just sucks. But some maps that there's like multiple big choke points and flanks and stuff is really where it could work. But if that's the case, you can probably run something else and get by without bonk. So very situational. Depends on how willing the enemy is to chase you down, I would say. More so than how good you are at getting away with it. Because if you run by a sentry, it's going to deal damage to you, and that's going to slow you down. And usually that is what happens. And usually you use it to get past sentries. Now you can use it to distract sentries. If they have like 3 sentries and you pop bonk to give your team an opening to attack, that can be good. But you might as well just switch to medic and Uber like a good player, switch to demo, switch to soldier and run like stock with battalion's backup to push through sentries. All of those are going to work much better. But if you want to stay on scout, it can kind of be situationally good. The Crit-a-Cola. I would say this is high A tier. For your average use, it's good. It does good things. So giving yourself crits as a fast class that already has good damage output essentially gives you good damage fall off because crits reduce damage fall off by giving you a kind of like minimum damage. So it makes your chip shots deal like 80 to like 100 depending on how many pellets hit at medium range. And at point blank, I think you do like 140 or something like that. So you one shot other 125s that are not overhealed. And you can also use it with Crit-a-Cola, or I'm sorry, with the Shortstop to accurately kind of like snipe with a pistol. It's not really the best thing ever. You might as well just play sniper at that point, but it's funny and it's fun, but it's not good. But with like stock, it can be very good. Mad Milk, I'll put Mad Milk in S and then the bread milk in SSS because it's the same thing, it looks cooler. So this is not better, it just looks cooler. So Mad Milk, I would say, is really good. If you're a good scout and you Mad Milk an enemy player and you can land your shots, you essentially become a tank. And if you time your engagements right, so like if you're playing on a flank, even if you're fighting an enemy combo, like an enemy medic, soldier medic, you can tank the soldier's damage if you can keep landing meat shots and kill him faster than he can kill you. Now, if the enemy medic is good and bolts him, and he's good too and tries to dodge you, it can be tricky, but this is like something that can be done with good execution. But also in team fights, if your team's not running medics, this kind of helps a little bit with dealing with the lack of heals because now your teammates get health. So if you are in like a huge team fight, like 6v6 on like a point or whatever, and you Mad Milk the entire enemy team, your team has significantly better odds of winning now because all of the enemies heal them on hit. So like if an ally soldier, like a friendly soldier, starts spamming that with rockets, he's just gonna spike heal himself, and he can just sit in the middle. He can literally rocket jump in and just bomb into the entire group and tank it, unless they like really burst him down in an instant. But it allows your team to be tankier. You can win 1v1s easily. You can win 1v2s, which you have no business of winning otherwise. And it just opens up a lot to, the scout. Now, obviously, you can throw it on a single enemy and a full health ally kills that enemy and then no one gets healed. That can happen. It can get reflected. You can miss. Like, obviously, but it can also extinguish yourself and allies. So there's like a lot of utility there. I think like Mad Milk with stock is quite good, actually. Winger, I think, is high A tier. Being able to double jump, actually, I don't think it's better than pistol, than stock. It allows you to double jump higher, or jump higher in general. Both of your jumps jump higher, which allows you to get access to new routes and to get on top of things you couldn't previously double jump to. So it just opens up certain maps to you, but not every map. There are maps that it does nothing, where it just makes you jump higher. But double jumping higher can still throw off enemies' aim. Maybe an enemy soldier is not used to the extra jump height. Maybe use it to double jump higher above spam, or to double jump like, just higher up and then switch to stock or switch to scattergun and then start attacking while you're falling, stuff like this. It still gives you that height boost, which can still be used to like jump over projectiles and things like that, or like take advantage of weird angles that enemies aren't expecting because you're jumping higher than normal. It also has higher damage, but it only has 5 shots loaded. So it can kill, I think a single clip can kill 125 HP class if every shot hits at close range. But typically you're going to use it for cleanup damage and the jumping. Pretty Boy's pocket pistol, I would say, is also like here, a little bit worse than stock, a little bit better than the winger, I think. Shoots faster, has stock's base damage, but it has 3 shots, or I'm sorry, it has 9 shots instead of 12, so it has 3 less shots, and it heals you up to 3 per shot. So a single clip can heal you 21, or no, is it 27? Yeah, 3 times 9. Yeah, so it's 27, which is good, because if you need chip health, which is often the case, Scout often takes spam damage from just like random rockets, pills, things exploding, flame particle happens to collide with you, like just random stray bullets hitting you while you're like moving around the map. This chip healing can add up to a lot. And if you use this correctly, you can also use it to like shoot heavies from like medium range to kind of tank their chip damage and put chip damage on them. Now, usually they will out DPS the healing, but it allows you to at least do this so that you can start like peppering the heavy, distracting it. Maybe, spy or sniper in your team goes for the kill, or your combo starts fighting theirs, assuming you have one, which in 12v12 you might not. You never know. but it still gives you the option to shoot things at range, to heal. If there's very little healing on a map, like few health packs, you don't have a medic, you don't have a dispenser, it's nice to have. Now the thing, I usually prefer this over Mad Milk because I can like win a fight and then heal afterwards every single time. If there's things to shoot, you can heal, whereas this, it's on like an 18-second cooldown. So like if you win the fight, heal yourself to full, you're out of a secondary until it's ready to throw again. Whereas with this, you have stored damage, you have constant chip healing, constant chip damage, and it also has higher DPS than stock pistol. So like in a 1v1 with another scout who's good, you know, you can kind of squeeze out a little bit of an advantage from that. Just a little bit, not much. Guillotine. Is Guillotine S or A? It's definitely good. I'm going to put it in high A. I almost want to put it in an S, but I don't think that's really accurate. So I think high A is fine. You have access to burst damage at range and a projectile. And the nice thing about it is Scout has no indirect damage, but with this he does. So he can throw it, and then if an enemy happens to walk around the corner, if a sniper is like slowly peeking and about to, you know, headshot as soon as something's visible, you can catch them with this while you are not visible, because you can throw it and then go hide. Or you can throw it as you're like moving in between cover. So this allows you to harass enemy snipers, to harass enemy combos, to get good damage on any target that you want to. It's 90 damage total, 50 plus the 40 bleed, so it's a lot of damage. From range, it's on a 6-second cooldown, so you don't have to worry about reloading. If you open a 1v1 with this against an enemy scout and you hit them with this, you pretty much won. Like, you just have to chip shot them for 30. It's really crazy. It's really good. But if you miss, obviously it sucks. So it's very polarizing, where if you miss, it's terrible, but if you hit, it's great. But that's true of like pretty much every weapon in the game. The stock bat. I would say the stock bat is like here. It's good. Stock bat is good. It doesn't punish you for missing like some of the other bats, and it just has good damage output. The pan. I'm gonna move the pan down to B tier because the pan is so loud, it reveals where you're at to enemies more. So it's like more obvious someone is getting hit with something. So it kind of like broadcasts your location, which usually isn't a good thing. Like with Scout, you kind of want to get in, kill things, get out, and not really make it clear where you're at, so that when enemies are in an area, they're like, I think there's a Scout here, but I don't know. But like with this, they're like, oh, there's a Scout panning my teammate. Like, it's cool. The pan is awesome, but it's just not really, it's not going to help you. So some of these other ones, for these reskins, I think I'm just going to skip them. All these are reskins, unless they have like a unique thing. So for the fish, I think the fish is the same thing. The fish and the hand they're identical to stock, but because every time you hit something, it's broadcasting to the entire server that someone is being hit by a fish. It's just, I don't think it's a good thing, because then it's like constantly, like you see who is getting hit and who is doing the hitting, and I don't like broadcasting information to the enemy team. Like if I bat a sniper, well, that's the other thing too. If you bat kill a sniper, I mean, I guess like in the kill feed it'll show up, but like it stays in the feed for longer because every time you hit it, it refreshes it. So like they can more clearly see, oh, that my sniper is being beaten to death with a fish. I'm gonna go help him. So like that becomes a potential interaction that you give the enemy team, where it's like, I'm beating your sniper to death, come kill me. Whereas like with the bat, they would just see in the kill feed for half a second that a sniper got killed by a bat, and they probably won't notice it. I might be reading into this, and if so, just put these in A, but that's just what I think. Golden Pan, same thing. This as well, the Saxy. This, I think, leaves an Australian corpse, doesn't it? Well, either way, you leave a corpse no matter what. So I guess this is just the same. This is just identical. The Bat Saber, a little bit cooler for sure. Knife, a little bit cooler. The rest of these, Bat Out of Hell, it's whatever. We'll skip those. All right, Sandman is bad. It used to be good when it's stunned and there was a guillotine combo, but it's just terrible now. It does nothing. Candy Cane gets you one shot. Actually, Sandman gets you one shot as well because it reduces your max health. Candy Cane also gets you one shot by rockets, stickies, and grenades. Certain stickies, if the demo's close enough because of ramp up, can one shot you anyways. But typically the range that they will be deaded at, there will be a little bit of damage fall off. So this just makes it so that those stickies one-shot you easier. The health pack on kill is just not it. Boston Basher, I think, is a little bit better than the bat. I think it's better than the bat because you can jump with it, and it increases your jump height, so it has utility. It does more damage if you are timing your melee attacks. Like if you're gonna run in and just keep whacking and hope every single attack hits. If you're really good, you can kind of pull that off. But usually when people run this, they'll kind of precisely go for melees. Now, if the enemy player is good at meleeing, like even if it's an enemy sniper, and you're going for the melee, they can 195 you and insta-kill you, so you have to be careful. You do not have access to an insta-kill on them. You hit 105 crit, and even with the bleed, they'll die after the fact. So if you trade blows and they 195 you, you die, they live. If you crit with the Boston Basher or 3 rune, is 3 rune in here? It's not. They will tank it and then die from the bleed unless they get like, you know, healing source or whatever. But typically for batting, you either want to just rush into them and keep whacking them until you get crits, or you want to precisely hit them with this. But this also can be used to to height boost yourself mid-jump, and it can actually boost you very high if you swing while jumping, double jump, swing while jumping. So that's 2 instances of hitting yourself. It boosts you up very high, and then you can actually hit yourself a 3rd time to go even higher. So if you're overhealed, you can kind of leverage this to quickly, rapidly jump, and then you also have an upgraded melee if you're good at precisely hitting with melee. Otherwise, if you're just like spam melee and you miss a lot, don't run it. You'll probably kill yourself quickly, so don't do that. For Atomizer, I think it's like kind of similar. A little bit better than stock bat because it gives you access to something good. Now, if players are really good, I find that melee isn't, because there's like good sentry placement, enemies are together, they focus fire you if you do stupid risky things like meleeing someone to death, and maybe they even pull out their own melee and get a crit on you, and they have good positioning, good movement to kind of like interact with you where you can't just mindlessly rush in. That's really what gets you killed. Like if they pull out their melee and you can tell they know what they're doing, and like they're like moving around like AD strafing, and like you can tell when a player knows what they're doing with movement usually. So like if you know they're going to be a problem when you're going to melee them to death, usually you're better off switching to scattergun and just killing them, because you've forced them to pull out their melee anyways, which just gives you free damage if you're smart. So you can do this thing that's like an old concept called weapon heckling, where you like pull out the weapon to like harass the enemy correctly. So like at mid to long, you shoot the pistol, keep peppering them with the pistol, and then when you get close, use the scattergun and you kind of bait the soldier. Like if you're fighting a soldier, bait the soldier into switching to rocket launcher, and then go back to medium range where rocket launcher is worse and stuff like that. So if you like pull your melee out and run at them, then they pull their melee out and you switch to scatter and just don't get in melee range, that's probably the best way to handle that. Because like getting insta one-shot sucks. So, but this allows you to triple jump. It has mini crits airborne, which I think has a little bit higher DPS if you're constantly airborne, but it's harder to hit than the stock bat. So there's a lot of trade-offs with the bats. The one bat gets you the highest jump boost, but you self-damage, has the highest damage output, but you can easily self-damage if you miss. This one can mini crit in the air and gives you triple jump, but it has worse average damage if you're on the ground. And then this one has no jumping capabilities at all and just has the most forgiving like melee attacks if you're just going for crits and you expect to miss. So it depends on what you want. You could consider these all equal, honestly. Rap Assassin, I think, is like high A tier. So I don't think Scout should be going for melees for the most part, unless you know for a fact you can get away with it. Like if it's a 1v1, your like opponent is out of ammo or whatever. But usually I would prefer just to like throw a damage orb and break line of sight and reload and maybe regroup, heal up, and so on. That's just me. But I prefer things like the Rap Assassin or the Atomizer, like repositioning tool, or a thing that lets me deal damage at range. So I can run like a pistol and a scattergun. So that way I have like a projectile that can hit things that are chasing me around corners, or that I can just lob into a group of enemies and put a bleed on a random target for some chip damage. Or, you know, hit an enemy heavy that's revved up, because those are very easy to hit with the Rap Assassin, put some damage on him, then start pistoling him while he's bleeding, which is actually pretty good damage output at medium range, and can add up to like 100 to 150 damage at a far range where the heavy can't really damage you that well either. So it gives you something to do. And also you can harass snipers with it too. So it's really good at like it can be very difficult for Scout to get through front lines to fight like a sniper. So I feel like Wrap Assassin and Guillotine gives him something to do aside from just chip-shotting him with like Pistol and Scatter for like flinching and chip damage. You can actually confirm a kill if these land, which is nice. So gives you something. But I think these are just good for the projectile spam, for the bleed. You can catch things off guard if you open a fight with them, and a 1v1 you usually win. Like you can open the fight from like long to medium, like as you're closing distance, hit them with like a bleed, and then you just appear. Because when people bleed, they act different for the most part. They're like, it's like getting hit with a flare. You're flinching, your dude's doing like hurt sounds. You've taken like 90, like 8 or 50 damage plus the 40 bleed. You know you have to go get health now. It's like getting hit with a flare. So like the psychology of the player, unless they're like overhealed, kind of changes. Like if they don't know where it came from too. Like if you're just like moving in between cover and you like, there's like fractions of a, you know, visibility, you hit them with a bleed and then like you're not visible, they have no idea what's going on. It can change the dynamics of a fight for sure. And maybe they start retreating and it's an easy kill. And even if they don't retreat, like you put damage on them. And if you're at full health, you just have an advantage now. So pretty nice. Stun on a stick, situational. There's a lot of burning enemies, you can get crits. If there's a lot of pyros, you can use it to tank fire a little bit better, but otherwise it has worse DPS. Fan of War, I think is just bad or fun. If you want to use this to set up kills on enemies by marking them for death, shoot them with a gun instead. It does the same thing. If I do 200 damage with 2 shots to an enemy heavy and then get mowed down, versus if I hit him with a melee and then mark him for death and then get mowed down, at least I put him at half health with this case. Whereas with this, you know, or you survive and that 200 damage is enough with focus fire to kill that heavy or that soldier or whatever. So I would rather just do this than risk getting killed, because you have to get in a melee range. This I can be like on high ground, I can be double jumping in the air away from the target. Maybe I'm like near a corner so I can turn a corner if they start focusing on me. So I'm not like out in the open. This is significantly safer to use than this, and this is just a huge risk. But here's where I think the weapons are at. This is basically just also S tier. Yeah, I think the Scattergun and Mad Milk for 12v12, definitely the best overall. Now, that doesn't mean that Mad Milk is better than Pistol, because there are a lot of situations where Mad Milk isn't really good. If the enemies are reflecting it constantly, if they're not really grouped up, if they're like really aware, because like sometimes if you throw this, you have to see the enemy to hit them with this, right? Or at least know where they're at. So like if you throw this at them and like an enemy scout is good and you're both at kind of like medium range, you might hit him with Mad Milk, but he might put like 50 to 60 on you, like before you even have your weapon out. So that it could backfire too. Like I've seen like people have this out and just get like 2-tapped by an enemy scout before they can even get their gun out. So it's like it can completely backfire if like the encounter doesn't go, like you're kind of like assuming you're swooping down on them, which you don't know. Like people can be aware of what you're doing and take advantage of that. But if you open a team fight with this, that's where it's huge, I think. For 1v1s, it's a toss-up, depends on what's going on, but for team fights, it definitely helps. And that wins you games at the end of the day. Healing your team can win you games, for sure. All right, so that is it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this or found this interesting. Feel free to post a comment as to what weapons you think are too high or too low and why. I'm always curious to see how people play the game, what they think about it. I could be wrong about some of these things. I'm not like a super... I'm like a definitive source of information for this game. I'm not like Banny or something, but all right. Peace.